When the master's wife asked her slave to teach her something unladylike, she shattered the invisible wall between their worlds forever. In the rigid society of 1850s plantation America, Eleanor Caldwell's simple request wasn't just improper, it was revolutionary. Behind closed doors, away from judging eyes, a forbidden alliance formed between mistress and slave. What began as riding lessons quickly became something neither woman could have imagined, a dangerous friendship that would test the very foundations of everything they believed. Eleanor Caldwell stared out the window of her lavish bedroom, her fingers absently tracing the intricate lace curtains as she watched the field hands moving in the distance. Another stifling day of embroidery circles, forced smiles, and meaningless pleasantries stretched before her like a prison sentence. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, each ring echoing through the grand house like a reminder of her gilded cage. "Harriet, come tighten my corset," she called, her voice hollow even to her own ears. The morning light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rug that her husband had imported at great expense, another trophy in their collection of wealth and status. Harriet entered silently, her worn cotton dress a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. Her eyes remained downcast as always, her movements efficient and practiced from years of service. For 7 years, she had dressed Eleanor, brushed her golden hair, and anticipated her every need without complaint or recognition. Yet they had never truly seen each other until today. "Have you ever wished to be someone else, Harriet?" Eleanor asked suddenly, surprising herself with the intimate question that had been burning inside her for months. Harriet's hands froze momentarily at the strings of the corset, her fingers hovering in mid-air as if touching something dangerous. The question hung between them, dangerous and electric. "It's not my place to wish, ma'am," she finally replied, her voice carefully measured. "But if you could," Eleanor pressed, turning to face her slave for perhaps the first time in all their years together. She searched Harriet's face, noticing for the first time the tiny scar above her eyebrow, the flecks of amber in her brown eyes, the way her lips pressed together when she was choosing her words carefully. Something flickered in Harriet's eyes, caution, curiosity, or perhaps both. Her shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "I don't know what you're asking, Mrs. Caldwell. Such thoughts don't serve people in my position." Her hands resumed their work, pulling the corset strings with practiced precision. Eleanor moved to the window, the half-tightened corset allowing her a rare deep breath as she gazed across the vast Caldwell plantation. She pointed to the distant fields where a stable hand was riding freely across the green expanse, his body moving in perfect harmony with the chestnut mare beneath him. "I've watched you with the horses when you take them to exercise," she said softly. "When no one's looking, you don't ride side-saddle like a lady. You ride like them. Like a man." Harriet's breath caught, her fingers instinctively reaching for the small wooden charm hidden in her pocket, a horse her father had carved for her before they were separated at auction. "I shouldn't," she began, fear edging into her voice. "Teach me," Eleanor interrupted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them, surprising them both with their urgency and vulnerability. "Teach me to ride like that, like you do when no one's watching, like you're part of the wind itself." Harriet's eyes widened in alarm, darting to the door as if expecting the overseer to burst through at any moment. "Mrs. Caldwell, if the master found out—" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They whipped Sally from the kitchen house just for speaking out of turn. What they'd do to me for something like this?" She shook her head, unable to finish the thought. "He won't find out," Eleanor insisted, a desperate edge to her voice that she'd never heard herself use before. She crossed the room quickly, her half-dressed state forgotten as she grasped Harriet's work-roughened hands in her soft ones. "James is away for the next fortnight, inspecting the new property in Charleston. We'll go to the East Meadow, where no one ventures, past the old creek bed." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Please, Harriet. I'm suffocating in this life. Every day I feel pieces of myself disappearing, replaced by the perfect, empty Southern lady I'm supposed to be." Harriet stood perfectly still, her mind racing through all the terrible consequences that could befall her. A slave, teaching a white woman something improper? The whipping post would be the least of her worries. She could be sold downriver, separated from her younger sister who worked in the kitchen, the only family she had left in this world. Or worse. "Why?" she finally asked, the single word loaded with danger and a lifetime of caution. "Why would you risk your reputation for something so unladylike?" The question was really, why would you risk my life for your whim? Eleanor's perfect posture crumbled slightly, the facade of the plantation mistress falling away to reveal something raw and human underneath. She released Harriet's hands and turned back to the window, unable to face her as she confessed. "Because when I watch you ride like that, you look free. Truly free. And I haven't felt free a single day since I married into this plantation." She paused, her voice dropping even lower. "Sometimes I think I've never been free at all." For a long moment, the two women stared at each other across the divide of their stations, truly seeing each other for the first time. One trapped by social expectations, suffocating corsets, and the invisible chains of propriety. The other by iron chains, whips, and the brutal reality of being considered property rather than person. Both prisoners in different ways on the same plantation. Harriet studied Eleanor's face, searching for signs of a trap or cruel game. But all she saw was loneliness and a desperate yearning that mirrored something in her own heart. Against every instinct for self-preservation, against everything she'd learned about surviving in this harsh world, she made a decision that would alter both their fates forever. "Tomorrow morning," Harriet finally whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of the plantation coming to life. "Before sunrise, when the mist still covers the fields, wear your riding skirt but bring trousers from your husband's closet, the small ones from when he was ill last winter." She glanced toward the door, then added, "I'll meet you by the old oak behind the stables. Don't tell anyone, not even your lady's maid." Eleanor's face lit up with the first genuine smile Harriet had ever seen from her, transforming her already beautiful features into something radiant. "Thank you," she breathed, a flush of excitement coloring her cheeks. "You won't regret this, I promise." Harriet nodded once, her face carefully neutral as she resumed tightening the corset, binding Eleanor back into her proper place. But her mind was already racing with the enormity of what she'd just agreed to, the terrible risks and the small, dangerous spark of possibility. But what Eleanor didn't realize was that her simple request would crack open a door that neither woman could ever close again. By sunrise tomorrow they would both cross a threshold from which there would be no return, setting in motion events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about power, freedom, and their place in the world. Dawn had barely broken when Eleanor slipped from the main house, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wore her formal riding habit, a bundle of her husband's trousers and a loose shirt tucked discreetly beneath her arm. The morning air was thick with mist, nature's accomplice in their conspiracy. Harriet was already waiting by the ancient oak, two horses saddled beside her, not Eleanor's usual gentle mare, but Thunderclap, a spirited gelding that James rarely permitted his wife to ride. Eleanor's breath caught at the sight. "Are you certain about this, Mrs. Caldwell?" Harriet asked, her voice low and wary. "It's not too late to return to the house." "Eleanor," she corrected impulsively. "When we're alone like this, could you call me Eleanor?" Harriet's eyes widened at the impropriety. "That would be most inappropriate, ma'am." "More inappropriate than teaching me to ride astride," Eleanor challenged with a small, nervous laugh. "Please, Harriet, just here, just between us." Harriet hesitated, then gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "The clothes," she said, gesturing to the bundle. "You'll need to change behind those bushes. No one can ride properly in that contraption. Eleanor emerged minutes later, flushed with embarrassment and exhilaration. James's trousers were cinched tight at her waist with a length of rope, the shirt billowing around her slender frame. "I feel positively scandalous," she whispered, glancing down at her legs, outlined clearly in the borrowed trousers. "That's nothing compared to how you'll feel astride," Harriet replied, a hint of amusement finally breaking through her caution. "Now, watch carefully." With fluid grace, Harriet mounted her horse in one smooth motion, her legs straddling the animal's back with confident familiarity. Eleanor stared, mesmerized by the forbidden sight of a woman sitting as men did, commanding the horse with subtle shifts of her weight. "Your turn, me." Harriet caught herself. "Eleanor." The name sounded strange on her tongue, dangerous and intimate. Eleanor approached Thunderclap with trepidation. Her first attempt to mount ended with her sprawled inelegantly in the dewy grass, her face burning with embarrassment. "I'll never manage it," she lamented after her third failed attempt. "You will," Harriet insisted, dismounting to demonstrate again. "You're thinking too much like a lady. Feel the horse beneath you. Trust your body's strength." On the fifth attempt, Eleanor found herself astride Thunderclap, her legs spread in a most unladylike fashion, the world suddenly looking different from this new perspective. "I did it," she exclaimed, giddy with accomplishment. "Now you must learn to move with him," Harriet instructed, remounting her own horse. "Forget everything you've been taught about proper riding. Your body and the horse's body should become one." They rode slowly at first, Harriet calling out instructions as they made their way deeper into the secluded meadow. Eleanor felt every muscle in her body awakening, working in ways they never had before. Without the restrictive side saddle, she could feel Thunderclap's movements, the powerful muscles shifting beneath her. For the first time, she understood what it meant to truly ride. "Loosen your grip on the reins," Harriet called. "He can feel your fear. Trust him, and he'll trust you." Eleanor forced her fingers to relax, and immediately Thunderclap's gait smoothed. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, a sound of pure, unfettered joy that startled them both. "I've never felt anything like this," she admitted, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Harriet watched her carefully, a complicated emotion crossing her face. This is how riding should feel. Like freedom. They practiced for nearly 2 hours until Eleanor's thighs burned and her back ached from the unaccustomed posture. Yet she had never felt more alive, more present in her own body. As they guided their horses back toward the stables, the sun now fully risen, a movement at the edge of the tree line caught Harriet's attention. She raised a hand sharply, signaling Eleanor to halt. "Someone's there," she whispered urgently. Eleanor's blood turned to ice as she made out the figure of Mr. Peterson, the plantation overseer, standing at the forest's edge. Had he seen them? For how long had he been watching? "Change back quickly," Harriet hissed, dismounting and leading both horses behind a copse of trees. Eleanor fumbled with her proper riding habit, her fingers clumsy with fear. Not for herself, her position as the master's wife would protect her from the worst consequences, but for Harriet, who had no such protection. When they emerged from the trees, Eleanor was once again the picture of Southern propriety. Side saddle properly in place, not a hair out of position. Harriet walked several paces behind, head bowed, the proper posture of a slave attending her mistress. Peterson approached, his thin lips curved in a suspicious frown. "Mrs. Caldwell," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Unusual to see you riding so early, and in this remote area." Eleanor summoned every ounce of her breeding to look down at him with mild disdain. "I find the morning air beneficial for my constitution, Mr. Peterson. My physician recommends it highly." His gaze slid to Harriet, who kept her eyes fixed firmly on the ground. "And you needed a house slave as an escort? Not one of the stable boys?" Harriet has been attending to my personal needs since before my marriage, Mr. Peterson. I find her presence comforting when James is away." Eleanor's voice was cool, brooking no argument. "I trust that's not a problem?" Peterson's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Of course not, Mrs. Caldwell. I simply worry for your safety in these remote areas." "Your concern is noted. Good day, Mr. Peterson." As they walked away, Eleanor could feel his eyes boring into their backs. Beside her, Harriet's breathing was shallow, her face expressionless but her eyes filled with fear. "He suspects something," Harriet whispered once they were out of earshot. "He has no proof," Eleanor replied, though her own heart was racing. "And we'll be more careful next time." Harriet shot her a startled look. Next time? Mrs. Caldwell, Eleanor, this was already too dangerous. If he had arrived just minutes earlier. "But he didn't," Eleanor insisted. "And I can't go back to how things were before. Not now that I know what it feels like to ride. To really ride." She lowered her voice further. "Please, Harriet. Tomorrow?" Against her better judgment, Harriet found herself nodding. The look of pure joy on Eleanor's face was like nothing she had ever seen from the usually composed mistress of the plantation. That evening, as Eleanor sat through dinner with her sister-in-law and her insufferable gossip about the neighboring families, her mind kept returning to the meadow, to the feeling of the horse beneath her, and to Harriet's rare smile when she had finally mastered the proper posture. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive, truly present in her own skin. Meanwhile, in the slave quarters, Harriet lay awake long into the night, her body tired, but her mind racing. She had seen something in Eleanor today, a glimpse of a woman who might, against all odds, understand what freedom truly meant. It was a dangerous thought, more dangerous than teaching her to ride astride could ever be. As she finally drifted towards sleep, Harriet couldn't shake the feeling that the riding lessons were just the beginning. What happened next would test the limits of everything both women thought they knew about power, loyalty, and themselves. For 2 weeks they continued their clandestine meetings in the dawn hours. Each day, Eleanor grew more confident on horseback, her posture improving, her commands becoming more intuitive. And each day, the invisible barrier between mistress and slave seemed to thin just a little more, worn away by shared secrets and mutual respect. The eastern meadow became their sanctuary, a place where the rigid hierarchy of the plantation dissolved into the morning mist. Here, there were no masters or slaves, just 2 women and their horses, moving in harmony with the breaking day. "You're a natural," Harriet remarked on the 10th morning, watching as Eleanor guided Thunderclap through a series of tight turns that would have been impossible from a side saddle. The gelding responded to her subtle commands with eager precision, his powerful muscles bunching and releasing beneath her. "You ride like you were born to it." Eleanor beamed at the compliment, wisps of golden hair escaping her simple braid as she brought the horse to a stop beside Harriet. Her cheeks were flushed with exertion and pleasure, her eyes brighter than Harriet had ever seen them in the formal settings of the main house. "I had an excellent teacher," Eleanor replied, patting Thunderclap's glossy neck. She glanced at Harriet with genuine admiration. "Though I suspect I'll never match your skill. You make it look like breathing." It was true. When Harriet rode, she transformed. Her usual careful reserve melted away, replaced by fluid grace that made horse and rider appear as one being. There was a wildness to her movements, a primal connection that Eleanor often found herself transfixed by, the forbidden beauty of a woman so completely free, if only for these brief moments stolen from the day. "Where did you learn to ride like that?" Eleanor asked as they walked their horses toward a small stream to drink. The question had been burning inside her for days, but she'd hesitated to ask, aware of how little she knew about Harriet's life beyond her service. Harriet stiffened slightly, the question venturing into personal territory they had tacitly avoided. The fragile trust between them was still new, untested. After a moment's hesitation, she replied, "My father, before we were sold to different plantations when I was 12. He trained horses for our previous master in Virginia." Eleanor nodded, sensing the pain beneath the simple statement. "He taught you well. He said horses don't care about the color of your skin or whether you're a man or woman. They only care if you understand them." Harriet's voice softened with the memory, her guard lowering slightly. "He said a good rider listens more than commands, and he said—" She paused, perhaps considering whether to continue. "He said freedom is something you feel here first." She touched her chest, "before you ever feel it anywhere else." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither woman dared to fully acknowledge. The morning breeze rustled through the tall grass, carrying the sweet scent of wildflowers and the distant sounds of the plantation slowly coming to life. "I understand that now," Eleanor said quietly, her fingers absently tracing the rough fabric of the borrowed trousers. "These mornings with you, they're the only time I feel truly myself. Not James Caldwell's wife, not Thornfield Plantation's mistress, not Judge Caldwell's daughter-in-law. Just Eleanor." Harriet met her eyes, a complicated emotion flickering across her face. Wariness, understanding, and something else. Something that might have been longing in another life, another world. "It's dangerous to speak this way." "Is it?" Eleanor challenged gently. "More dangerous than what we're already doing." She gestured to her masculine attire to the horses, to the meadow that had become their secret world. "More dangerous than this." Before Harriet could respond, the crack of a branch startled them both. They turned sharply, horses shifting nervously beneath them, to see Peterson emerging from the trees, his thin face twisted with triumph. He stood watching them, his overseer's whip coiled at his side like a sleeping snake. "Well, well," he drawled, his eyes taking in Eleanor's trousered form with undisguised disgust. What would Master Caldwell say if he could see his refined wife now, dressed like a man, riding like a savage? His gaze shifted to Harriet, hardening with malice. "And you, getting above yourself as usual." Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest, but she straightened her spine, summoning every ounce of her authority as the plantation mistress. "What I do on my husband's property is none of your concern, Mr. Peterson." Peterson took a step closer, seemingly emboldened by catching them in such a compromising position. "Is that so, Mrs. Caldwell? I believe maintaining order among the slaves is precisely my concern, and ensuring the reputation of Thornfield remains unsullied." "You forget yourself," Eleanor snapped, though her mouth had gone dry with fear. "Perhaps not," he agreed with a malicious smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "But what she does," he jerked his head toward Harriet, "very much is my concern. Corrupting the master's wife, teaching her to behave like a common field hand, that's worth at least 20 lashes, maybe 30, given the intimacy of the offense." Harriet's face remained impassive, but Eleanor saw her hands tighten almost, imperceptibly, on the reins. She had seen the aftermath of Peterson's whippings, the torn flesh, the scars that never fully healed, the occasional death when his rage exceeded his restraint. "You will do no such thing," Eleanor said, her voice cold with fury. "Harriet acts under my direct orders. Any punishment would be a direct affront to my authority in this household." Peterson's smile widened, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Master Caldwell returns tomorrow. We'll see what he has to say about these orders." His gaze lingered on Eleanor's trousered legs, then moved between the two women with insinuating slowness. "I wonder what he'll think of his wife's new riding style, or her sudden closeness with a slave." The implication was clear, and Eleanor felt sick with fear, not for herself, but for Harriet. James Caldwell was known for his jealous nature and his swift, merciless punishment of any perceived slight to his honor. "Return to your duties, Mr. Peterson," she commanded, though her voice trembled slightly. "This matter is between my husband and myself." With a mocking bow that bordered on insolence, Peterson backed away. "As you wish, Mrs. Caldwell. For now." He cast one last threatening glance at Harriet before turning and disappearing back into the trees. When he was gone, Eleanor turned to Harriet, her face ashen. "I'm so sorry. This is entirely my fault. I should never have asked this of you." Harriet's expression was carefully blank, the mask of subservience firmly back in place. The woman who had laughed and ridden freely just minutes ago now vanished as if she had never existed. "We should return to the house, ma'am." "Harriet, please. We need to change you back into proper clothes before anyone else sees," Harriet interrupted, her voice practical but distant. "And we need to think. Peterson will waste no time spreading rumors even before the master returns." The ride back to the stables was silent, the joy of their morning shattered by Peterson's intrusion. The world seemed suddenly darker, the plantation's familiar buildings looming like a prison as they approached. As Harriet helped Eleanor change behind the oak tree, her movements were efficient but impersonal. The brief intimacy they had shared evaporated in the face of real danger. "He'll tell James everything," Eleanor said miserably as they walked toward the house, now properly attired as mistress and slave once more. "Yes," Harriet agreed simply, walking the requisite 2 paces behind. "What will we do?" Harriet stopped, turning to face Eleanor with an expression that made the mistress catch her breath, a mixture of resignation, sorrow, and something that might have been regret. "There is no we, Mrs. Caldwell. Not any more. There can't be." "Don't say that," Eleanor pleaded, glancing around to ensure they were still alone. "I'll speak to James. I'll tell him it was all my idea. And he'll believe you chose to ride astride in his clothes without being corrupted by someone." Harriet shook her head, her eyes reflecting a lifetime of hard lessons about power and its abuses. "The best you can hope for is that he'll sell me rather than have me whipped publicly. And if Peterson hints at impropriety between us, even selling me might not satisfy him." The stark reality of their situation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. These past 2 weeks had felt like freedom, like friendship, like something approaching equality. But the truth was inescapable. Harriet was property, and Eleanor was the property owner's wife. All the morning rides, all the shared confidences, all the tentative trust they had built, none of it could change that fundamental fact. "I won't let that happen," Eleanor vowed, gripping Harriet's arm with desperate intensity. "I swear it, Harriet. Whatever happens, I'll protect you." Harriet looked down at Eleanor's pale hand against her dark skin, the contrast a visual reminder of everything that stood between them. "Some things are beyond even your control, Mrs. Caldwell." "Not this," Eleanor insisted, her blue eyes fierce with determination. "Trust me, Harriet. Please." For a moment, something flickered in Harriet's eyes. Hope, perhaps, or simply resignation to forces beyond her control. Then she gently removed Eleanor's hand from her arm, the propriety of their respective positions reasserting itself. "We should hurry back," she said softly. "There's much to prepare before the master returns." The rest of the day passed in a fog of anxiety for both women. Eleanor moved through her duties mechanically, reviewing the household accounts, instructing the cook about dinner preparations, writing correspondence, while her mind raced with scenarios and contingency plans. Harriet worked with silent efficiency, her face revealing nothing as she polished silver and prepared Eleanor's evening clothes. That night, after dismissing Harriet with a formal, "That will be all," Eleanor paced her bedroom, her mind racing with plans and possibilities, each more desperate than the last. The thought of Harriet being sold away, or worse, was unbearable. These morning rides had awakened something in Eleanor, a hunger for authenticity she hadn't known she possessed, a glimpse of a woman she might have been in another life. But more than that, they had given her a friend, perhaps the first real one of her life. She paused at the window, looking out at the slave quarters in the distance. Somewhere in those simple wooden structures, Harriet was preparing for bed, perhaps already resigned to whatever fate awaited her tomorrow. The inequality of their situations struck Eleanor anew. While she worried in her luxurious bedroom, Harriet faced the very real possibility of physical pain, separation from her sister, or worse. "I won't let it happen," Eleanor whispered to the darkness. "I can't." Meanwhile, in the cramped confines of the slave quarters, Harriet sat on her thin pallet, a small wooden horse clutched in her hands, the last gift from her father before they were separated forever. The other house slaves moved around her, preparing for sleep after the long day, their quiet conversations a backdrop to her troubled thoughts. "You all right, Harriet?" her younger sister Esther asked, sitting beside her on the pallet. At 16, Esther worked in the kitchen, her quick mind and deft hands making her valuable to the cook. "You've been quiet since you got back this morning." Harriet forced a smile. "Just tired is all." Esther's eyes narrowed with sisterly perception. "It's more than that. Did something happen with the mistress?" Harriet hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing for you to worry about." But worry she did. She had known better than to let herself care for Eleanor, known the danger of forgetting, even briefly, the unbridgeable chasm between them. Yet, somehow, watching the mistress's joy as she experienced true freedom for the first time had broken through Harriet's carefully constructed walls. In those precious dawn hours, she had allowed herself to see Eleanor as simply another woman, brave, curious, trapped in her own way. Now they would both pay the price for that momentary connection. As midnight approached, Harriet finally lay down, though sleep eluded her. Through the small window, she could see the main house, a single light still burning in what she knew was Eleanor's bedroom. The mistress would be pacing, planning, believing she could somehow control what was coming. That was the privilege of her position, the belief that her will mattered, that she could shape events rather than merely survive them. Harriet knew better. Whatever happened tomorrow would follow the inexorable logic of the plantation system, a system built to crush any hint of equality or genuine human connection between white and black, master and slave. Peterson had seen something dangerous in their morning rides, not just the impropriety of Eleanor's masculine attire, but the easy companionship between them, the blurring of boundaries that the entire social order depended upon. Such transgressions could not go unpunished. The only question was who would bear the brunt of that punishment. As dawn approached, Eleanor made her decision. Slipping from her bed, she dressed quickly in a simple morning gown and made her way to her husband's study. The plantation ledgers were kept in the bottom drawer of his massive mahogany desk, locked away from prying eyes. Eleanor had watched him unlock the drawer countless times over the years, had seen where he kept the small brass key. With trembling fingers she retrieved the key from its hiding place behind the portrait of James's father and opened the drawer. The leather-bound ledger was heavy in her hands as she placed it on the desk and began to search through the meticulous records of human ownership. There, Harriet's name, alongside the price James had paid for her 7 years ago. Eleanor stared at the figure, the cold arithmetic of human worth making her stomach turn. Beside it was a notation: "Personal servant to Mrs. Caldwell." Taking a deep breath, Eleanor dipped a pen in ink and carefully added a new entry in her best imitation of her husband's handwriting. When she finished, she returned the ledger to its place, locked the drawer, and replaced the key. What she had done was illegal, possibly criminal. But as she slipped back to her bedroom in the gray light of dawn, Eleanor felt only a grim determination. Peterson would tell James everything, of that she was certain. But now she had a plan, a desperate, dangerous plan that might save Harriet, even if it cost Eleanor everything else. She paused at her bedroom window, looking out at the eastern meadow where they had ridden so freely just yesterday. In the pale dawn light, it seemed impossibly distant, a dream landscape where different rules had briefly applied. Now they were firmly back in the real world, with all its brutal hierarchies and cruel certainties. As the household began to stir, Preparing for the master's return, two women face the coming day with very different expectations, but the same gnawing fear that their brief taste of freedom and connection was about to be cruelly, irrevocably ended. In the kitchen, the cook was already preparing breakfast, the smell of biscuits and ham wafting through the house. The stable boys were tending to the horses, unaware that Thunderclap and Harriet's mount had already been ridden at dawn. The field hands were making their way to the cotton fields, another day of backbreaking labor ahead of them. And somewhere on the road from Charleston, James Caldwell was approaching, bringing with him the full weight of his authority as master of Thornfield Plantation. What he would do when Peterson whispered in his ear about his wife's unseemly behavior remained to be seen. Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She had made her choice, set her plan in motion. Now, all she could do was wait and hope that the fragile bond forged in those dawn rides would be strong enough to withstand the storm that was surely coming. James Caldwell returned to Thornfield Plantation just before dusk, his carriage kicking up clouds of dust as it rolled down the long drive lined with ancient oaks. Eleanor watched from the parlor window, her heart hammering against her ribs, the altered ledger entry weighing on her conscience like a stone. "Your husband approaches, ma'am," Harriet announced formally from the doorway, as though they hadn't shared whispered confidences and forbidden freedom just days before. Eleanor turned, searching Harriet's face for some sign of their connection, but found only the perfect mask of servitude. "Thank you, Harriet. Please inform cook that dinner should be served promptly at 7. With a curtsy, Harriet withdrew, leaving Eleanor alone with her anxiety. She smoothed her silk gown, James's favorite blue, and touched the pearl, necklace at her throat, armor for the battle ahead. The front door opened, and James's voice boomed through the foyer. "Where is my lovely wife?" Eleanor pasted on a smile and moved to greet him, accepting his perfunctory kiss on her cheek. "Welcome home, my dear. I trust your business in Charleston was successful." "Exceedingly so," James replied, handing his hat and gloves to the waiting footman. "The new property will yield excellent returns. But I'm famished and in need of a drink. Have Harriet bring brandy to my study." Eleanor's stomach clenched. "Of course." As James disappeared down the hallway, Eleanor caught sight of Peterson hovering near the entrance to the servants' quarters. His thin lips curved in anticipation. Their eyes met briefly, and Eleanor lifted her chin in silent challenge before turning away. In the kitchen, she found Harriet preparing a tray with James's favorite crystal decanter. "He wants brandy in his study," Eleanor said, her voice low. "Peterson is already circling. Be careful." Harriet nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Yes, ma'am." "Whatever happens, remember what I said. I won't let him hurt you." A flicker of something, doubt perhaps, or resignation, crossed Harriet's face. "Some things cannot be prevented, Mrs. Caldwell." "This can," Eleanor insisted, then stepped back as another servant entered the kitchen. Dinner was an excruciating affair. James dominated the conversation with tales of Charleston society and his business triumphs, while Eleanor picked at her food, hyper-aware of Harriet moving silently around the table, refilling wine glasses and removing plates. "You're unusually quiet tonight, my dear," James remarked as dessert was served. "Are you unwell?" "Just a slight headache," Eleanor lied. "Nothing serious." James studied her face. "You look pale. Perhaps you've been overexerting yourself in my absence." The question seemed innocent enough, but Eleanor detected an undercurrent that made her blood run cold. Had Peterson already spoken to him? "Not at all," she replied smoothly, "though I have been riding each morning. The doctor suggested fresh air would improve my constitution." "Did he indeed?" James took a sip of wine. "Curious that Dr. Merriweather would prescribe riding when your nerves have always been so delicate." Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Raised voices, the sound of something breaking. James rose from his chair, his expression darkening. "What in God's name?" The dining room door burst open, and Peterson appeared, dragging a struggling young black man by the collar. "Caught this one trying to escape, Master Caldwell. Had these on him." He thrust forward a bundle of papers. Eleanor recognized the young man as Isaiah, one of the stable hands who had always been kind to Harriet. Her heart sank. James examined the papers, his face flushing with anger. "Forged travel papers? Where did you get these, boy?" Isaiah remained silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Answer your master," Peterson snarled, delivering a vicious blow to Isaiah's kidneys that made him double over in pain. "Stop it," Eleanor cried, rising from her chair. "There's no need for violence at the dinner table." James turned to her, surprised by her outburst. "This doesn't concern you, Eleanor. Return to your meal." "I will not sit by while a man is beaten in my dining room," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. A dangerous silence fell. James studied his wife with narrowed eyes, then turned back to Peterson. "Take him to the barn. I'll deal with him after I've finished my dinner." As Peterson dragged Isaiah away, James returned to his seat, his movements deliberately calm. "Now, my dear, perhaps you'd like to explain your sudden concern for the welfare of runaway slaves." Eleanor's mouth went dry. "I merely object to violence at the dinner table. It's uncivilized." "Civilization," James mused, cutting into his apple tart with precise movements, "rests upon order. Without order, without each person knowing their proper place, society would collapse into chaos." He fixed her with a penetrating stare. "Don't you agree?" The question was a trap, and Eleanor knew it. "Of course," she murmured. "I thought so." James dabbed his mouth with his napkin. "Which is why I find Peterson's other reports so disturbing." And there it was. The moment Eleanor had been dreading since Peterson had discovered them in the meadow. "What report might that be?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "He claims to have seen you riding astride, dressed in men's clothing, in the company of your personal slave." James's voice was dangerously soft. "Riding like equals. Is this true, Eleanor?" She could deny it, of course. Call Peterson a liar. Demand he be disciplined for spreading falsehoods about the mistress of Thornfield. But one look at James's face told her he already believed it. "I have been exploring a different riding style," she admitted carefully. "For my health. Harriet accompanied me, as is proper. In my trousers," James's voice rose slightly. "With no side saddle? No chaperone? The early morning air is beneficial. Do not lie to me." James slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal goblets jump. "Peterson tells me this has been going on for weeks, that you and that slave girl ride out alone at dawn, returning flushed and familiar with each other." His eyes blazed with anger and something else. Humiliation. "What will people say when they hear how my wife debases herself?" "No one will hear anything because nothing improper has occurred," Eleanor replied, struggling to remain calm. "Harriet was teaching me to ride as her father taught her. Nothing more." James stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Her father? You discuss her family? Her past?" He shook his head in disgust. "You've forgotten yourself entirely, Eleanor. Forgotten your position, your responsibilities, your dignity as my wife." "Perhaps. I've simply remembered that there is more to life than position and propriety," Eleanor said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, dangerous and irrevocable. James's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "I see." He rose from his chair with deliberate slowness. "Well, then, it seems I must remind both you and your riding instructor of the proper order of things." Eleanor stood as well, her heart racing. "James, please." "I will deal with you later," he cut her off. "First, I must attend to the runaway, and then to your corrupting influence." He strode toward the door, pausing only to add, "Have Harriet sent to the barn immediately." "No." Eleanor moved to block his path. "James, this is my fault, not hers. She was following my orders. "Move aside, Eleanor." His voice was ice. "I altered the ledger," she blurted desperately. "Last night, I recorded her manumission. She's free, James. You can't punish her." James went very still, his face a study in disbelief. "You did what?" "I freed her. Legally. It's recorded in your hand. Or what appears to be your hand. The date is from before you left for Charleston." Eleanor lifted her chin defiantly. "Punish me if you must. But Harriet is no longer your property to abuse." For a moment, James simply stared at her, shock giving way to a terrible, cold rage. Then, without warning, his hand shot out, striking Eleanor across the face with enough force to send her stumbling backward. "You treacherous, deceitful woman," he hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The crime you've committed?" Eleanor touched her stinging cheek, tasting blood where her teeth had cut into her lip. "I've done what's right." James laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "What's right? You've committed forgery, theft of valuable property. And for what? Some misguided attachment to a slave?" He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "You will go to your room and remain there until I decide what to do with you. As for your precious Harriet, free or not, she has committed crimes against this household that cannot go unpunished." "You can't touch her if she's free," Eleanor insisted, though fear was beginning to overtake her bravado. "Can't I?" James's smile was terrible to behold. "A free Negro caught helping a slave escape faces penalties far worse than whipping, my dear. Imprisonment, hard labor, even death." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "Isaiah. But Harriet had nothing to do with—" "Didn't she?" James's eyes glittered with malice. "Peterson found the forged papers in the stables. Who had access to the house to writing materials to my seal? Who could have helped him?" He tightened his grip on her arm. "Your Harriet will hang for this, Eleanor. Unless—" "Unless what?" she whispered, already knowing the answer would destroy her. "Unless you renounce this madness. Tear out that forged page from my ledger. Confess to Peterson and the house staff that you were confused, unwell, acting without proper feminine guidance while I was away." His voice softened to a silken threat. "Do this, and perhaps I'll be merciful. A whipping for the girl, but nothing permanent. And for you, a long rest at your mother's house until you remember your place. It was a devil's bargain. Deny the truth, betray Harriet and herself, return to the suffocating prison of her former life, or stand firm and watch Harriet face a fate far worse than servitude." "I need to think," Eleanor said, her voice barely audible. James released her arm with a small shove. "Think quickly. I'll expect your decision after I've dealt with the runaway." He straightened his waistcoat. "And, Eleanor, should you attempt anything foolish, remember that your actions have consequences not just for your slave, but for her sister as well. Esther, isn't it? The kitchen girl?" The threat was clear. Eleanor watched him stride from the dining room, her mind racing with desperate calculations. She had thought herself so clever, so righteous with her forged manumission. Instead, she had only endangered Harriet further. As soon as James was gone, Eleanor rushed to the servants' quarters, ignoring the shocked looks from the house slaves as she burst through doors normally closed to her. She found Harriet in the small room she shared with Esther, packing a small bundle with shaking hands. "He knows," Eleanor gasped, "about everything, the writing, the ledger, and he's trying to connect you to Isaiah's escape attempt." Harriet's face remained composed, though her eyes betrayed her fear. "I heard. The whole house is talking about it." She continued, folding a worn shawl into her bundle. "I'm leaving, Mrs. Caldwell. Tonight, before he comes for me." "Leaving? But where will you go?" "North. There are people who help runaways. Routes to follow." Harriet glanced at her sister, who stood wide-eyed in the corner. "Esther comes with me." Eleanor shook her head. "He'll hunt you, both of you, and if you're caught, we'll be no worse off than if we stay." Harriet replied with simple logic. "At least this way we have a chance." The reality of what was happening crashed over Eleanor like a wave. This was no longer about morning rides or forbidden friendship. This was life and death. "I'll help you," she decided suddenly. "I have money, jewelry, enough to get you far away from here." Harriet studied her face, perhaps searching for signs of insincerity or madness. "Why would you risk everything for us?" Eleanor touched her bruised cheek, a bitter smile twisting her lips. "Because I finally understand what your father meant. About feeling freedom here." She pressed her hand to her heart. "Before you feel it anywhere else." She took a deep breath. "And because, for the first time in my life, I'm choosing to be the woman I glimpsed in those morning rides with you. Not James Caldwell's wife, not Thornfield Plantation's mistress, but Eleanor." Something shifted in Harriet's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. She nodded once. "We leave at midnight. Master Caldwell will be occupied with Isaiah until then." Eleanor tried not to think about what that meant for the young stable hand. One battle at a time. "I'll bring what I can to the old oak behind the stables. Be careful, Harriet." As she turned to leave, Harriet caught her arm. "Mrs. Caldwell, Eleanor, come with us." The invitation hung in the air between them, impossible and tempting. For a wild moment, Eleanor imagined it. Fleeing north, leaving behind the suffocating world of Thornfield Plantation, finding a place where she could live authentically, where her friendship with Harriet wouldn't be constrained by the brutal hierarchies of Southern society. But reality intruded. A white woman traveling with 2 fugitive slaves would draw immediate attention. She would endanger them rather than help them. "I can't," she said softly, "but I'll make sure you get away safely. I promise." The next few hours passed in a blur of secret preparations. Eleanor smuggled food from the kitchen, collected the jewelry her mother had given her before her marriage, wrote a hasty letter of introduction to a northern cousin who had always held abolitionist sympathies. All the while, the sounds of James's "justice" echoed from the barn, Isaiah's cries eventually fading to whimpers, then silence. At 11:30, Eleanor slipped from the main house, a small satchel clutched to her chest. The night was moonless, perfect for an escape. She made her way to the old oak, her heart pounding with every shadow and sound. Harriet and Esther were already waiting, their few possessions bundled in cloth. Esther's eyes were red from crying, but her young face was set with determination. "Here," Eleanor whispered, handing over the satchel. "Money, jewelry you can sell, food for the journey, and this—" She pressed the letter into Harriet's hand. "My cousin in Philadelphia. If you can reach her, she'll help you." Harriet tucked the letter into her bodice. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "What will happen to you when he discovers we're gone?" Eleanor shrugged, affecting a bravery she didn't feel. "He'll be furious, of course, but I'm his wife. He can't sell me or hang me." She attempted a smile. "The worst he can do is send me to my mother's, which might be a blessing in disguise." They both knew it wasn't true. James's rage would be terrible, and Eleanor would bear the brunt of it. But there was no turning back now. "You should go," Eleanor said, glancing nervously toward the main house. "Follow the North Star. Stay off the main roads." Harriet nodded, then surprised Eleanor by pulling her into a brief, fierce embrace. "I won't forget what you've done," she whispered, "and I won't forget those mornings in the meadow." "Nor will I," Eleanor replied, her voice thick with emotion. With that, Harriet took Esther's hand, and the 2 women slipped into the darkness, heading toward the swamp that bordered the northern edge of the plantation, a dangerous route, but one the slave catchers and their dogs would be reluctant to follow. Eleanor watched until they disappeared from sight, then slowly made her way back to the main house. As she approached, she saw a light still burning in James's study. He was waiting for her decision, unaware that she had already made it in the most irrevocable way. For a moment she considered running herself, following Harriet and Esther into the night, consequences be damned. But that would only bring the slave-catchers down on them faster. No, her place was here, to face James's wrath and perhaps to delay the discovery of their escape for as long as possible. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor entered the house, closing the door softly behind her. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the silent house like a funeral knell. "I've made my decision," she announced, stepping into the study where James sat nursing a glass of brandy, his knuckles raw and bloody from his work in the barn. He looked up, his eyes cold. "And?" Eleanor straightened her spine, channeling the woman she had been in those dawn rides, brave, authentic, free. "I will not recant. I will not tear out that page. Harriet is free, and I stand by my actions." James set down his glass with deliberate care. "Then you have sealed her fate, and your own." He rose from his chair. "I'll deal with her first. Peterson," he called. No answer came. James frowned, moving to the bell pull. "Useless drunk," he muttered, tugging it sharply. Still no response. The house remained eerily silent. A terrible suspicion began to dawn on James's face. He strode past Eleanor, out into the hallway, bellowing for servants who did not appear. Eleanor followed at a distance, watching as he threw open the door to the servants' quarters, finding only empty beds where Harriet and Esther should have been. "What have you done?" he rounded on her, his face contorted with rage. Eleanor lifted her chin. What was right? The blow came swiftly, knocking her to the floor. As James loomed over her, shouting for Peterson, for the stable boys, for anyone to organize a search party, Eleanor tasted blood in her mouth once more. But this time, it tasted strangely like victory. They wouldn't find Harriet and Esther tonight. By the time the dogs were gathered and the search organized, the women would be deep in the swamp, following paths that had guided runaways before them. And though Eleanor would pay dearly for her part in their escape, though the coming days and weeks would test her in ways she could barely imagine, she had finally found something she had been searching for all her life without knowing it. Her own voice, her own moral compass, her own freedom. As James dragged her to her feet, his face a mask of fury and betrayal, Eleanor thought of Harriet riding freely across the meadow, her body one with the horse beneath her. She held that image close, a talisman against whatever was to come. "You've ruined everything," James hissed, his fingers digging into her arms. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "No," she replied with quiet certainty. "I've only just begun." The search for Harriet and Esther continued for 3 days. James dispatched riders, hired slave-catchers with hounds, and offered rewards. Eleanor watched from her locked bedroom, praying they wouldn't be found. On the 4th day, James entered, haggard and furious. The dogs lost their scent at the river, but they won't get far. Eleanor remained silent, her defiance small but meaningful. "Isaiah died last night," James announced flatly. "His wounds became infected." "You beat him to death?" Eleanor whispered, horrified. "I administered necessary discipline," James corrected coldly. "What's unusual is having my wife conspire with slaves to undermine our way of life." He gripped her chin painfully. "This isn't about reputation. It's about survival. Do you want to see Thornfield burned? Every white person slaughtered?" "Harriet and Esther never wished harm on anyone," Eleanor protested. "They only wanted freedom." "Freedom," James spat. "There's no such thing for their kind." "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "You will write to your mother explaining that you've been unwell and require rest at her home. You will present yourself as a devoted wife concerned only for her delicate constitution. And if I refuse, then I will have you committed to the asylum in Charleston," James threatened. "Dr. Merriweather has already expressed concern about your mental state." Eleanor recognized the truth in his threat. A husband's word against his wife's would never be questioned. I'll write to Mother today, she conceded. Excellent. And that forged manumission. It's been removed and burned. Should Harriet ever be captured, she remains my property. 3 weeks later, Eleanor stood on her mother's veranda in Virginia, watching a summer storm approach. You've been so withdrawn, her mother observed. James's letter suggested something serious. A kind of moral confusion, he called it. Unnatural sympathies. James says many things, Eleanor replied carefully. Not all of them true. I was 19 when I married your father, Mrs. Harrington said suddenly. I had such dreams then. Reality proved somewhat different. Eleanor turned in surprise. They had never spoken of her parents' marriage beyond pleasantries. What happened at Thornfield, Eleanor? The truth, please. For a moment, Eleanor hesitated, but there was something in her mother's gaze that encouraged honesty. I learned to ride astride, Eleanor began. Harriet taught me, in secret. We would go out at dawn. I wore James's trousers. It was exhilarating. Friendship between mistress and slave is a complicated thing, her mother observed. Some would say, impossible. In those morning rides we glimpsed a different world, Eleanor said. One where we were, simply two women who respected each other. And so you helped her escape, Mrs. Harrington finished. You and this house slave against the entire system of Southern society. Are you shocked? Eleanor asked. To her surprise, Mrs. Harrington laughed warmly. I've been waiting your entire life for you to discover your own strength, though I didn't anticipate quite such a dramatic awakening. You're not ashamed of me? No. Concerned for your safety, yes. What you did was dangerous. Men like James do not forgive challenges to their authority. He threatened to have me committed if I didn't agree to come here. And he would have done it, her mother said grimly. Your father threatened me.